Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we'll be discussing Game 37 of the regular season between the San Jose Sharks and the Colorado Avalanche, in which the Sharks have lost 3-1. And just in the previous game that the Sharks played against the Edmonton Oilers, they lost that one 5-0. I talked about how weird of a game that actually ended up being because of how many goals the Oilers ended up scoring in the first period, and then how decently the Sharks responded in the next two periods to make it end up a bit of a closer and more interesting game than you would think by what the score would say. Here tonight, it's kind of similar in the sense that it is also an extremely weird game, because if you take a look at this one just at the surface, you see a 3-1 Avalanche win, and especially when you consider the fact that the Avalanche's third goal was an empty netter and their second goal was a go-ahead goal with 3 minutes to go in the third period, you're thinking, hey, the Sharks played pretty well, they brought it decently to a really good Avalanche team, and they kept it close, had a chance of getting like a point or two in this one, but unfortunately got away from them at the end. However, you take a bit of a deeper look at it, and you see the shot totals, you think, oh my god, the Sharks got absolutely crushed. The Sharks with a season-low 11 shots on goal here tonight, as the Avalanche triple that output with their own 33 shots. And 33 in itself is not even particularly impressive, and it only is made impressive because the Sharks had essentially no shots on goal here tonight. But then again, if you take an even deeper look at it, you see the fact that honestly, while the Sharks were themselves not generating a ton of chances or really any chances at even strength, neither were the Avalanche, as the Sharks played a pretty solid defensive game at the very least for the first two periods of this one. In the third period, for sure, the Colorado Avalanche did wake up a bit, kind of similar a couple of games ago to the Los Angeles Kings game. It feels as though these really good teams head into the second intermission and the coach just says like, hey, we should be winning this game, and then the players do wake up a bit in that third period. So this final frame did get away from San Jose a bit, but earlier on, the Sharks were not really allowing much at 5-on-5 at the very least. The Sharks did end up taking a few too many penalties, which allowed the Colorado Avalanche to get some really good shots off and force Kähkönen to make some really nice saves to keep the Sharks alive in this one. But at 5-on-5, it was relatively even in terms of chances going either way, though when it comes to just possession time and zone time, obviously Colorado won out in that. So as we quickly move to how this game went down, it was not the most exciting game of the night, or of the season, I should say, for San Jose. Of course, 11 shots are never going to be particularly exciting unless you were a really big fan of like defensive hockey, or I guess if you're a fan of the Avalanche, as it is Colorado who strikes first with a goal on the power play from Mikko Rantanen. That would be the only goal of the first period. In the second, it would be Tomas Hertl on the Sharks' own power play to tie that one up. And then we'd head into the third period. It would be 1-1 game for the majority of the third, though the Avalanche were trying to change that, hit like a couple of posts, both coming from Nathan MacKinnon, had a 5-on-3, everything but the kitchen sink thrown at San Jose, but they held on at least until the last 3 minutes, as a delayed penalty call allows the Avalanche to get a 6-on-5, and then an easy tap-in goal from Nichushkin makes it 2-1, and the Sharks, while they themselves get a chance with the 6-on-5 situation, which is then, at first it's a 5-on-4, then it's a 6-on-5 situation, at the end of the day, the Avalanche get the empty netter, and that does it for the game. And so, the Sharks will end 2023 not on a win, but instead on an 8-game losing streak, which is not exactly the way the Sharks were hoping to end this calendar year. Moving on to the players to talk about, honestly, there isn't really anything from a forward standpoint that really stands out in a positive way for the San Jose Sharks. They generated 11 shots. There were even fewer actual chances from those shots. And so I was thinking about the fact of not really talking about these players all that much for tonight's game. However, I felt as though that would do a disservice to the defensemen here tonight for the San Jose Sharks. And so I will get to that a bit later, but I thought at the very least, since I'm going to be talking about the players in some capacity, I'll briefly mention the forwards. So let us start off with the top line of Eklund, Hertl, and Zadina. This only remained the top line for a bit of this game, as relatively quickly Zadina was swapped off of the top line in favor of Anthony Duclair. This is because this first line was just not rolling at all at even strength, and that's not necessarily on Zadina. Perhaps he was the weakest link, and that's why David Quinn swapped him, but the other two players here, Hertl and Eklund, also pretty much invisible here tonight. Eklund, probably one of his worst games of the season. At the very least, he wasn't making like mistakes, and that's kind of a theme in a way for a lot of these Sharks players. But in terms of actually generating offense, which is of course what you're supposed to be doing as a top line forward, there was literally none of that. I think he had like 1 or 2 nice won battles in the offensive zone that led to absolutely nothing. But besides that, he was not particularly noticeable. And the same would be said by Tomas Hertl. He does get the power play goal, which was certainly nice to see, the only goal of the game for the San Jose Sharks, but again at even strength, which is what's more valuable from a analysis perspective. Hertl didn't really do much of anything. When it comes to the second line, this was likely the Sharks' best line of the game, and that's really only because it was the only line to actually generate a couple of chances. Granlund himself set up a few really good ones. A nice pass to Mike Hoffman, who just barely missed. A nice pass to Fabian Zetterlund, who just barely missed. And then Granlund himself got a great opportunity, which he hit the crossbar on, which could have given the Sharks, I believe, a lead at the time had he managed to score on that one. So the second line, they got their chances, which was nice to see. In terms of actual consistent pressure in the offensive zone, definitely none of that, as is the case for every single one of these forward lines on the Sharks tonight. Then we have the third line, which was Barabanov, Studnicka, and Luke Kunin. So, of course, I've been quite hard on Studnicka for the entirety of his time with the San Jose Sharks, which amounts to, I think, 5 or 6 games at this point. I will say there was a bit more effort from Studnicka here tonight. It looked like he was actually skating with some purpose and some speed on the night. It didn't really actually lead to anything. He had a decent chance using his speed to get like a backhand shot on net, but he ends up sending it like 5 feet wide. I don't know if it went off a stick or what, but that one was not even close to hitting the net. And then besides that, he didn't actually do much of anything. But at the very least, this wasn't a game where I was saying, Studnicka's playing, that's odd. This was more so one that I said, Studnicka's playing, he's not really any worse or better than any of the other players on the Sharks, which is both a compliment and an insult to the rest of the players on the team. When it comes to the two wingers of the line, we have Barabanov, who at the very least, his biggest accomplishment this game was getting the Sharks' first shot on net. I believe it came like 12 minutes into the first period of this game, as he comes with a very simple and easy wraparound save, but kudos to him for getting the first shot, I guess. And then Luke Kunin existed here tonight, as has been the case for Luke Kunin for the past, month or so. He happens to exist in the lineup for the San Jose Sharks, and we can cry about the fact that he is still getting a lineup spot, but here he is. And then finally we have the fourth line, and interestingly enough, we found Duclair home on this line with Carpenter and Justin Bailey. Now, as I mentioned, Duclair did get promoted as the game went on to the first line, but either on the fourth line or the first line, he never really did anything of purpose. I thought at the very least, once getting a chance with Hertl and Eklund, we might see a high danger opportunity maybe here or there, but it never really happened. You never really actually noticed Duclair besides his just terrible penalty call right at the end of the third period after they gave up that go-ahead goal to Nichushkin. And so not a good game for Duclair at all. When it comes to the two other players here, Carpenter and Bailey, barely even noticed that they played here tonight, and that says it all. Then we arrive at the defenseman, and this is obviously who I wanted to talk about here tonight, because as I mentioned, the Sharks did a pretty admirable job, especially in the first 2 periods, at defending against a very skilled Avalanche team. And that is made even more impressive by the fact that it was just a few minutes into this game where Mario Ferraro, the Sharks' top defenseman on this team, left with an injury, leaving 5 relatively inexperienced defensemen besides Jan Ruda to have to pick up the scraps again against a very good Avalanche team that features players like McKinnon, Rantanen, Nichushkin, Johansson, and all of these guys. Cale Makar, of course, on the back end as well. And they did a really good job. And the 2 defensemen who stood out in a very, very good way here tonight were Ty Emberson, his first game back after missing a good few weeks with an injury, as well as Henry Thrun. And I want to talk about Henry Thrun specifically first, because he was called up a couple of weeks ago, got inserted into the lineup, and he's never really had all that great of a game. At best, he's been decent to just sort of not noticeable, and at worst, he's been actively really, really bad for San Jose. And so I thought that the moment a defenseman would sort of come back from injury, that Thrun would be the first man out of the lineup, and that that happened here tonight as Ty Emberson came back from that injury, so I thought indeed Thrun would be the odd man out. But I guess in a combination of trying to get Thrun some games, but also because of the fact that Kyle Burrows was a -5 the other night against the Edmonton Oilers, Thrun manages to maintain his lineup spot, and he rewards David Quinn with the performance that can only be somewhat similar to like his first game in the NHL last season. I still say that one was a bit better than this one, as there were still a couple of bad giveaways, but in terms of sort of the pressure that was on him, he did a very, very good job. I also appreciated the fact that he was the defenseman that David Quinn went with in penalty killing situations along with Jan Rutta, not only in 5-on-4s, but also in 5-on-3s, and the Sharks killed those off in the latter parts of the game. So again, extremely impressive from Thrun, who ends up with over 25 minutes of ice time. And so with the increased role here tonight, he rose to the occasion and he did a good job. So definitely commendations to him for sure. The other defenseman, as I mentioned, was Ty Emberson. He was already playing rather well for the Sharks prior to his injury. He was one of the better defensemen for San Jose on the back end there, and he picks up right where he left off. Played a strong physical game for San Jose, solid defensively as well, also in penalty killing role, as of course once Thrun and Rutta went off for a change, Emberson came on, did a good job, and so he was definitely only, to me, slightly behind Thrun in terms of best defenseman for the Sharks here tonight. The other three defensemen, I wouldn't say they were necessarily bad. I thought Rutta still played a really solid game. Of course, I talked about Thrun on the penalty kill. I mentioned that Rutta was the other guy there, so that's nice to see. And then when it comes to that bottom pairing of Okhotyuk and Calen Addison, these two players were decent. I don't think they were necessarily bad defensively, but they didn't have the high highs of Thrun and Emberson, and they were not really relied on to have those high highs either. But in terms of sort of massive mistakes here or there, yes, a couple. As I said, in the third period, things did get away from San Jose, and so there were definitely some awkward turnovers or just some missed positionings in that defensive zone that allowed the Avalanche to get that breakaway from Nathan MacKinnon where he split the defenseman and hit the crossbar and other things of that nature. But for a team that is extremely inexperienced outside of Rutta, missing their number one defenseman from the first period onward, they did a very good job. And then finally, we have the goaltender Kaapo Kähkönen, who of course you can't really help but feel bad for here tonight. He didn't necessarily have to make a ton of great saves early on in this game at 5-on-5, but when it came to on the power play, he definitely had to be sharp. He had to be on his toes. And then as the game wore on in the third period, where these chances started to pile up for Colorado, where things started to open up, he again had to make a ton of nice saves. He had really not much of a chance at all on the Nichushkin goal, and while I do think he could have played the Rantanen goal slightly better, it's hard to really fault him for a game in which he lets in just 2 goals and got just not enough offensive support from a team that put up 11 shots on net. So generally, a pretty good game for Kähkönen, as has been the case for much of this season thus far. But that will do it for this review. The Sharks will be back in action next year. I can't believe we have to wait all the way until next year for another Sharks game, but they will indeed be back, and we shall see if they can break off this 8-game losing streak, as we're getting dangerously close to how the Sharks started this season originally. Class dismissed.